views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It is time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to writers and journalists and editors and anybody writing stuff about the borough of the Bronx. And, in our second segment today, we're going to also talk to somebody who writes, but in a different way, an author who wrote a book about kind of the connection between Puerto Ricans and their faith in the borough of the Bronx and go back through some of the history. But to get started, I'm thrilled this evening to welcome back the tech and policy reporter from City and State New York. It is Annie McDonough. Always nice to have you with us, Annie.
Thanks so much for having me, Gary.
Annie has been hot on the trail of the question, maybe a little less of a question at the moment because it's reality, and her headline is New York City ready to relax COVID-19 safety measures. And she also did much more recently what we know about the future of mask, vaccine, and other COVID mandates in New York City. So let's start with that. The mayor has come out and no masks in schools, no vaccination checks at restaurants are required, and other indoor activities like gyms and venues and like movie theaters and those things. Masks will be still required on public transit and at Broadway theaters and other places. I think the discretion will be up to the proprietors of those places. I could go on and on. The question is and was and probably still is New York City ready for this? And is the mayor doing the right thing? Do you feel secure? Do I feel secure? Does your neighbor feel secure? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. There's two things changing today. The school mask mandate is no longer a mandate for students 5 years and older. And
we should say, by the way, that today we're recording the show Monday. It will not air till Thursday. So we'll be a little bit further into the week when it finally airs. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, no, thank you. So yeah, that's going away and that's gone away. And the Key to NYC program, which is the requirement that people show proof of vaccine, as you mentioned, at restaurants, bars, theaters, that sort of thing. Mayor Eric Adams announced this last week. And it, provoked a lot of different opinions. New York City is at a low level of community spread right now, according to the CDC's guidelines. Taking into account hospitalizations and cases. Experts are feeling pretty good about the fact that vaccination is high in New York City right now. About 70% of New Yorkers are fully vaccinated. Positive cases under 2%. I think there's consensus that, we're in a good place right now. We've moved beyond the sort of scary period that we were in a few months ago with Omicron. Whether that means we're ready to pull back on measures like masking, like vaccine mandates, I think is a bit more uncertain. Health experts are saying it's good to pull back, to adjust mandates based on the data and be flexible in how we approach COVID policies. But school masking is a controversial subject. It's people's kids, and the vaccine mandate has made a lot of New Yorkers feel safe going to restaurants, going to bars, going to theaters.
Me, so I'm included. Let's be honest about it. It's to me, the germ of the COVID thing is something we've never really experienced before. So this is almost like an experiment saying, well, wait a minute, if the numbers do drop, can we still, command what goes on and control infections? If it turns that there's a new variant that we have not dealt with before, batten down the hatches because it's going to happen again. Certainly we're all hoping that, it will pass to some degree. But then the second part of it was what you're talking about with schools. That is really a big question because 0 to 5, the little kids, maybe who need to get rid of their masks first, are the ones who are going to get rid of it last because there's no vaccine for them. I was in a classroom in a school a little while back, and everybody was masked, and I was like, oh goodness, I sympathy for the teacher. So hard to learn that way. It's hard to tell what we ought to do next. We were just talking before about the chancellor and the whole notion of virtual learning and kids learning outside. Do you think this is going to be kind of part of the school day in the long run? As we go on, and you wrote about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, so Schools Chancellor David Banks has talked about expanding remote learning, virtual learning options, and interestingly, not just as a COVID safety measure, not just as a health and safety imperative, but as a way to reach kids who have trouble getting to school, kids who are taking on jobs, who during the pandemic have taken on a job during the day and are providing, some financial contribution to their family now. This is sort of very early in the works, but both the unions and the Chancellor David Banks are interested in expanding virtual options for some classes, all classes, not just as a pandemic measure. The thing with closing schools during the pandemic is it's one of those measures that no one really wants to take unless things are really bad. Right. We know how hard remote learning is for the vast majority of students, how poor internet access still is for a lot of people. And so it's one of those, I think, last resort measures.
And it has so many trickle down effects, whether it be the effect on the MTA and transit, parents who have to go to work. It's just a monumental question. And I guess it goes back to the whole notion of living with a COVID, so to speak. But just back to the schools thing. It's bad for kids, and now we're getting all these reports on psychological issues. Kids don't, they imagine what the teacher's face looks like because they've never seen it. And I will tell you, as far as the virtual learning, say goodbye to snow days. I mean, that's
right. That's exactly right.
Why worry about a snow day? Of course, then we get into, do all the kids have hardware that they can use, et cetera, et cetera. What about the notion of laying off workers? Now, the city laid off 1,400. It's only less 1%, as I understand, of the municipal workforce. Are they going to still go there, do you think, and say, because wearing a mask and vaccine mandates are really two different things. What are your thoughts about that?
So what the mayor has said so far is, that's a good point. This week, what's changing is the Key to NYC program, the proof of vaccine requirement, and school mask mandates. It's not all systems go. The employer vaccine mandate is still in place. As you mentioned, the mask mandate is still in place on transportation, public transportation. So that employer mandate for private sector workers working in person, and as you mentioned, for municipal workers, is still very much in place. And those layoffs are happening. And the mayor has said that has nothing to do with what's happening, with the changes happening this week. Obviously, they're related, but that there's not a change happening on that front.
So are they going to do another go around and review and lay off some more workers? That would be interesting to me if they were.
Yeah, I think that that depends on whether they start to require in the future things like boosters and sort of up-to-date vaccinations.
That's right.
So they've sort of done the review, I think.
Listen, the numbers, I got to tell you, I'm proud of being a New Yorker. The numbers are fantastic. I mean, let's see, 77% overall, 87% of adults are fully vaccinated. That is very impressive, although the booster numbers were significantly lower. I think, I forget what it was, 57% or something like that. Let's talk about if you're a corporation and you're back to work and you feel like a lot of the corporations have fewer employees, the desks are spread out, in many cases they put windows in, so people are either in cubicles, and you say, we've really handled this well. Why do we still have to do it? And then of course becomes a political question of our freedom and and that whole thing. So do we expect a pushback from corporations on these things, or you think they're just going to say, look, let's not fight it, let's move forward?
I guess it's a good question. I think there's almost, we're sort of adjusted almost. It's been in place for a little bit. But it's a good question because you're hearing more these days about the return to the office. I'm hearing a lot of like just anecdotally April start dates in terms of getting back to work.
Yes, we've all heard that, right? Correct.
It's it's empty office buildings, right, downtown, midtown. There's a lot of interest, certainly from Mayor Adams, wants to get people out of their pajamas back into the office. Right. So maybe we see more pushback happening when employers start bringing their workers back into their midtown office buildings.
But you wrote about this, and the city is moving forward. I think it was Councilman Power's idea of having color-coded notifications. I don't know if it makes it less or more complicated. Why don't you just, it's like, I forgot what let's see, what I have the colors listed here, what orange means, I forgot that. So by the way, so it's green for low community spread, yellow for medium, orange for high community spread, and red, of course, for very high. Yeah. Is that what residents and citizens of New York City really need? In other words, just say low, medium, almost very high.
Right. There must be something visual about it. I don't know. But it was also Mayor Adams. He mentioned this a while back as something he would do. I don't know if you remember former Governor Cuomo's sort of microcluster zones. That was something that I think people found confusing. A lot of different overlapping sort of guidance systems here. But this one is actually specifically tied to the CDC's matrix for community level spread. So if it's helpful to think of it that way, I think that, it's not just New York City laying down its own numbers and its own measures. It's tied, the sort of risk level is tied to the CDC. And then the city has, at each of those levels, right now we're in green, low spread. Each of those levels, different steps for both individuals and the government to consider taking, re-implementing messaging.
I'm only laughing because I heard what you said. I don't know if it makes me more or less confused. Right. One quote I pulled out: "Consistency of messaging and metrics is essential," and I do think that's among the things that stirred people up about the vaccinations, about whether to wear a mask. That the messaging that came from the federal government to the state government all the way down to the mayor, although this governor and mayor get along better than the last. So I guess that let's use that as the way that we can conclude this dialogue. Let's get good messaging, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we need.
It is. And I mean, this is just a small anecdote, but on Friday when this rolled out, the CDC had some sort of hitch where they were saying the 5 boroughs were at a medium community level spread. And that was an error, I believe.
Oh my goodness!
And so that was the messaging error. Like, these hitches are going to happen, and so you really want to have good messaging on this and be clear.
Annie, thank you so much. If we want clear messaging, that's what we got to do. We got to check out City and State New York and check out what tech and policy reporter Annie McDonough is writing about, and then we'll get our clear messages. Thank you so much. We'll take a short break on the Bronx Buzz. Here's the book I was talking about. You're going to love it. Very, very interesting. We'll have the author on the show in just a moment. Don't go away.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. As I think you could tell early on, I'm incredibly enthusiastic about talking about The Kingdom Began in Puerto Rico with this gentleman, Angel Garcia. He's the author. He's also executive director of South Bronx People for Change, which is a church-based organization co-founded by Father Neil Connolly, who's the subject of the book. Angel, nice to have you with us.
Thank you. Nice to be with you. I was the executive director. Now
Okay.
doing other good things, but was very proud and very happy to be there.
There is so much here to talk about the book. What was the story that you felt needed to, like when you said, and you told me it took you 8 years, when you started this project, what was the germ of the story that you said has to be told?
Thank you. Essentially, I thought that there was a story about this man's journey through 27 years in this place that became known as the South Bronx, the most famous urban area in the United States, for unfortunately some of the wrong reasons. Everyone understands it as the place where the fires and the demolition took place, looked like Berlin after the war, etc. But I thought that I experienced it personally, that there were people who fought for good, decent living conditions in all of the areas of the South Bronx, and people needed to understand that. And I figured I would start with this man, Father Neil Connolly. He was going to be one chapter in a book. There he is at St. Mary's Parish. And I thought he was going to be the one chapter in the book. Once I started interviewing him in 2012, I realized this is going to be a whole book. He has a whole number of extraordinary stories. And as people evaluated the book for me, read versions of the book, I realized I needed to give a real context for what was going on in the South Bronx, in New York City, and in the church, because they all influenced the journey that he went through.
I think what is one of what is not fully understood in this story that you're laying out for us, what is not fully understood is the passion and connection that Puerto Rican people have for their faith.
Yes.
And it carries them through. I think many people who just assume left and right and blue and red would assume that Puerto Rican people, who are interested in immigration and everything else, would be liberal, so to speak. I hate using these labels, but that is what they would be. But there are many, many, many who their faith drives them and makes them much more conservative financially, and of course, much more conservative morally. Talk to me, if you will, about the connection between Puerto Rican people who came to New York City and the Bronx, and what those churches meant to them, and why a figure like Father Connolly was so immense.
Right, sure. Well, he went to visit them first, and that's sort of what the title is about, that he he got to understand their version of faith as he went to visit them and provided the sacraments in their form in the campos in Puerto Rico. So he came to them and as part of a church program, and therefore when he came to the South Bronx in a large, very large Puerto Rican neighborhood in Hunts Point, Longwood, he appreciated who they were, and he appreciated where they came from to come to this point as part of this great migration, 750,000 who came to New York City after the Second World War. And he was committed to helping them with their faith formation. And so thousands of people were coming to Mass on Sunday at St. Athanasius as a result of his connection to them. And he made sure that, as did many other parishes that were starting to take in Puerto Ricans in the city, that there were societies, Santo Nombre, Sagrado Corazon, all of these societies that had their English language versions were in Spanish, that the masses were, once the global church said you could say mass in the language of the people, they were saying the language in the mass in the language of the people. And they were reaching people even in corners of the neighborhood that seemed to be unreachable, like Hunts Point Peninsula, where he worked with the Puerto Rican people there to set up a community center and a parish, a chapel that was led by them, that they had control over.
They had ownership of. One of the most incredible images in the book is the picture of the rubble around the church.
Yes.
And this is a startling image to me, and and the same with all the images that come out of the book, and it underscores for me the notion that all of these things, the church, the neighborhood, the things that were going on were connected in a way.
Right.
In that people, of course, they go to church, they look to their faith when things happen, like it burns down. And I love that first image that we saw of the rubble, but the church is what stood strong. What was the image, what was the home, which was the place to solve our problems. So,
right. Well, I just want to, one thing to, the homes of people also became essentially the second level of the parish for them, because when things got really tough financially in the parish, they relied on the parishioners to feed them. The priests relied on the parishioners to feed them. They had that much faith in the people, and the people had built that much of a relationship that they worked out a commitment. They asked for it from the pulpit. They said, things are really tough, and we really need you to help us out. We would like to be able to eat in your homes because we cannot afford to cook.
Wow.
And the people responded because they knew that this was their priest. Not a single one of them was a Puerto Rican priest, mind you. You had an Irishman, an Italian, and several other Irishmen and Italians who spoke the language and understood their customs.
This brings up two things. One, the main thing I really want to focus on is what you told us earlier, that you had not thought about doing the whole book about Father Connolly, but he became such an important figure. What he did, an Irish Catholic pastor,
right?
I don't want to say adopted the community, but said, if I'm going to do God's work, so to speak, if I'm going to serve this community, I've got to do this. And that was learn the language and turn the church into something more than just a place that people came to pray and, bare their souls and all that. And that connection of the church being an influencer in neighborhoods is something that endures not only in Puerto Ricans, frankly, but in many Bronx people today.
Right. And as a matter of fact, the church, they had always had this approach that they needed to reach out to the church. One of the first scenes is him looking to deliver last rites to someone who had passed away in one of the buildings. And so they made a regular point of visiting people in their buildings. As I said, they went also to people to feed them. And they actually even held masses and Bible discussions in people's homes. So all of the homes and the streets themselves became the church. And that was influenced by the great event in the world, in Rome, in the 1960s, the Second Vatican Council, which said to the church, you must be a church of the people, and you must be a church in the world, bringing the world to a state of justice, equality, and dignity for all humankind. That was the Second Vatican Council, and that taught him how to reshape his mission.
In a society that had burned down people's homes and buildings and neighborhoods, and where people felt like, we're not getting it. We're not getting it from anywhere else. All of a sudden, here's a figure that is going to, that's a way we can get it. That's a way we can band together. And so the church then continued to emerge in importance.
Yes.
One thing that I was very surprised to find that he only was the pastor of the church from 1976 to 81. Somehow I assumed that, it's considering the complexity of the tome.
Yes.
I just assumed that, this was the legacy of him in this particular church, but
Right.
no, he had been elsewhere, and it was really this incredible 5 years, emerging from the fires in 1976 until 1981.
Yes. As a matter of fact,
We got about a minute for you, so
Sure.
believe me, we could talk a long time about this.
Yeah. Well, it's the fact that he became vicar of the South Bronx, and that he and many other priests and sisters and laypersons who saw a vision for what the South Bronx could be as a unified church, what they called the South Bronx Area Church. They created two organizations that sought to empower people, sought to bring lay people to leadership positions in the church and in the world, because Neil Connolly's life and the church's life, with many of the other priests and sisters, Father Jerry Ryan, Father Peter Gavigan, Father John Flynn, Sister Louise Molesky, Sister Valerie Lordy, and many others, was to be in the world and to develop the people. Because long term,
I'm surprised you didn't mention Father Gigante in that list.
Well, Father Gigante and Father Connolly were best buds throughout all that time in St. Athanasius.
We got to run.
Sure.
What's next? How do you see this playing in the long run? Take just a few seconds, or you're going to let this ride and see how people react to it.
I would love to see this. Obviously, I'd love for people to read the book. You can acquire it at the library, or you can acquire it through Fordham University Press. I want people to take the mission that they need to develop people power and organize in the South Bronx and in the rest of the Bronx, as many of them are already doing. The Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, Mothers on the Move, various
we got
other.
to run. There's 1,200. Some have estimated up to 2,000 not-for-profits in the Bronx. Boy, I hear it every week. We speak the same language, and what can I tell you? I mean, this is a central, and I'm not talking geographically, a central Bronx story about the South Bronx. Angel Garcia, congratulations on this work.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about it.
It's a tremendous work. It's a tremendous piece. And what I'm thrilled about is now we have another friend who can talk to us about the real life in the South Bronx when we need it.
And I can be reached. People can reach out to me, and I'm very happy to talk about it with them as well.
Great. Angel Garcia,
to you, Gary.
Great, thank you. Angel Garcia, and the book is The Kingdom Began in Puerto Rico. We also thank Annie McDonough for joining us. And, every single week we're talking about the Bronx. We're buzzing about the Bronx on the Bronx Buzz. Good.